The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am reviewing the Guardian cards in the Wages of Sin, the second Mythos pack in the Circle Undone cycle. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's get started. The first Guardian card in the pack is Alice LUXLEY, Fearless Flatfoot. She's a 4-cost asset with an intellect skill icon and the ally, detective, and police traits. While she is in play, your investigator gets +1 intellect. She also has the following response. After you discover a clue, exhaust Alice LUXLEY, deal 1 damage to an enemy at your location. She has 2 health, 2 sanity, and she takes up the ally slot. Alice LUXLEY was spoiled along with Mr. Rook and Henry Wan in the preview article for The Wages of Sin. Allies that boost skill values tend to be very strong, and Alice boosts intellect, which is the most important skill in the game, at least from a solo player's perspective. Cards that enable investigators to deal damage to an enemy without taking an action or making a skill test are also very strong, so Alice is batting 2 for 2 right out of the gate. Alice's response is slightly easier to trigger in multiplayer than solo. If you're playing solo and you take the investigate action, you're likely to take an attack of opportunity from an enemy at your location unless it is exhausted or it has the aloof keyword. It's a good thing then that there are several ways to discover clues while an enemy is at your location without taking an investigate action. One of the most obvious examples is Scene of the Crime, a Guardian event from Threads of Fate. Alice is pictured on the card, which is a pretty strong hint that you should play these 2 cards together. If you play Scene of the Crime as your first action, you'll discover 1 or 2 clues. Then you can trigger Alice's response to ping an enemy at your location for a damage. 1 damage is more than enough to take out an irritating enemy, such as Whippoorwill, which makes its return in the Circle Undone cycle. Playing Alice in combination with a fast card such as Working a Hunch from the core set, or a skill card such as True Understanding from the Boundary Beyond is another good way to cheat a clue and deal some damage to an enemy at your location without taking an attack of opportunity. If you're worried about dealing with multiple enemies, you may want to consider playing Alice in combination with Roland Banks or Evidence, either of which lets you discover a clue after you defeat an enemy. When you discover that clue, you can trigger Alice to ping those irritating enemies with 3 health, potentially saving you an action when you finish them off with your machete or 45 automatic later that turn. That is at great value in a game where actions are a precious commodity. There are more than a dozen investigators who can play Alice. Most of them have an intellect of 3 or 4 with Alice in play, although many investigators on the list already have a clear preference when it comes to filling the ally slot. For example, I don't expect Guardians such as Leo Anderson, Mark Harrigan, or Zoe Samaras to show much interest in Alice, especially in multiplayer. Leo has demonstrated a clear preference for expendable, non-unique allies, while Mark and Zoe will gravitate toward Beat Cop and Guard Dogs so they can do what they do best, that is, killing enemies. There are a couple of standouts on the list, namely Carolyn Fern and Joe Diamond. That shouldn't come as much of a surprise considering the cards released in the Mythos packs tend to support the investigators who were released in the deluxe expansion. Carolyn and Joe have an intellect of 5 with Alice in play, which is outstanding whether discovering clues is your primary or secondary responsibility. If you're playing multiplayer, the Guardian in the group will certainly appreciate the extra damage that you're able to dish out. Alice LUXLEY is a solid ally. If your Guardian or off-class Guardian is in any way responsible for discovering clues, that +1 intellect skill bonus is going to be extremely tempting. I'm certainly going to be considering Alice for a slot in my solo Guardian decks. Alice is a bit of a tad on the pricey side at 4 resources, but most of the really good allies cost about the same, so I can't really hold that against her. Alice's ability to deal damage without making a skill test is also very good. It also helps deal with annoying aloof enemies such as Whippoorwill or the Man in the Pallid Mask. A great card here to kick off this Mythos pack. The second Guardian card in the pack is Well Maintained. It's a free event that costs 1 experience point. It has an agility skill icon and the upgrade trait. It's fast and you may play it only during your turn. It has the game text attached to an item asset you control, limit 1 per asset. Response: after attached asset is discarded, return it to its owner's hand along with each other upgrade attachment that was attached to it. There are at least 4 ways item assets may be discarded in the Arkham Horror LCG. First, if an investigator is at his or her slot limit for a type of asset and wishes to play or gain control of a different asset that would use that slot, say the hand slot, the investigator must choose and discard other assets under his or her control simultaneously with the new asset entering the slot. For example, if Roland Banks' hands are full with a machete and an empty .45 automatic, he would need to discard one of them if he wants to play another item, say a fully loaded .45 automatic. Second, there are item assets that discard themselves. Examples of this effect include Baseball Bat, which will discard itself if a Skull or Tentacle Chaos token is revealed during an attack, Colt Vest Pocket, which discards itself at the end of the round, and Kerosene Lockpicks and Grotesque Statue, which discard themselves if they run out of supplies or charges, respectively. I'm sure there are examples of other cards, but I think you get the idea. Third, there are items that you must discard as part of their cost. Examples of this type of effect include the Disc of Itzamna, Police Badge, St. Hubert's Key, and Gravedigger's Shovel. Finally, there are cards that will discard assets you control whether you want them to or not. For example, Act of Desperation, a Survivor event from the Circle Undone, requires you to discard an item asset that takes up 1 hand slot from your hand or play area as part of its cost. There are many encounter cards that target assets as well. Most players are familiar with Crypt Chill from the core set, but there are others including Exhibit Hall, Medusa Exhibit from the Miskatonic Museum, Broken Rails from the Essex County Express, Corrosion, a very nasty treachery from the Path to Carcosa, and Sandstorm from the Guardians of the Abyss. If you're worried about discarding an item asset either willingly or unwillingly to one of the above effects, Well Maintained makes it a compelling case for itself. Discard the item asset, then trigger Well Maintained to return that card to your hand instead. If custom ammunition or reliable happen to be attached to that item asset, you get to return those to your hand too. Well Maintained has a bunch of interesting applications when you think about it. Obviously, Guardians may use Well Maintained to protect their expensive weaponry from being discarded by encounter cards. Nobody wants to pay 6 resources to replay their Well Maintained lightning gun after it gets tagged by Crypt Chill or Corrosion, but better that than the lightning gun ending up in the discard pile where it doesn't do anybody any good. That's especially true if that lightning gun happened to be the only weapon at the time. If you've invested the cards and resources to play a reliable lightning gun loaded with custom ammunition, protecting that investment with Well Maintained isn't the worst idea in the world. Guardians may also want to consider using Well Maintained to effectively reload their firearms when they run out of ammo. As long as your hands are full, you may play an item to replace an empty, albeit well-maintained firearm, returning that firearm to your hand. Then you can replay that firearm at some point down the road, returning it to your control fully loaded. Replaying firearms this way is resource intensive for a class that isn't exactly known for being overflowing with resources, but it does let you stretch those scarce ammo tokens a little further. Certain investigators may be able to find a way to abuse Well Maintained with powerful cards such as Police Badge. Discard that Well Maintained Police Badge to give an investigator 2 additional actions, then trigger Well Maintained to return that Police Badge to your hand so you can rinse and repeat the trick on the following turn. In this type of situation, Well Maintained is almost like having a 3rd or 4th copy of Police Badge in your deck, and that seems like pretty good value for 1 measly experience point. This trick also works with powerful cards that discard themselves when they run out of supplies or charges. For example, if Diana Stanley has invested 8 experience points to purchase 2 copies of Grotesque Statue, spending 2 more experience points to make sure those statues are well maintained so she can replay them when they run out of charges isn't the worst idea in the world. Grotesque Statue also happens to be fairly cheap, so there is no reason why you couldn't use Well Maintained to effectively replay the same copy of Grotesque Statue 2 or even 3 times during a scenario. I know that 12 charges will certainly go a long way during a game. I was very unimpressed by Well Maintained the first time I saw the card, but it's kind of grown on me. The card is fairly narrowly focused on item assets and cards with the upgrade trait that target item assets, so it's not going to make the cut in many decks. Certainly there are not many cards with the upgrade trait currently in the card pool, but it is sort of like having a third or fourth copy of an item in your deck. But it is worth noting that Well Maintained doesn't really do anything until that item is in play. If you never see the item, Well Maintained is a little more than skill test fodder. However, if there is an item asset that you can't live without or you're looking to abuse during a scenario, Well Maintained is the card for you. It's free, fast, and costs only 1 experience point, so the price is certainly right. The biggest hurdle may be figuring out what to take out of your deck for this card, but if the item is important to your strategy, then I think you'll be able to find the room. That's going to do it for my review of the Guardian cards in the Wages of Sin. Guardians do quite well in this pack, which is shaping up to be one of the stronger packs we've seen of late. Alice Luxley will likely find a home in investigators such as Carolyn Fern and Joe Diamond, both of which have a 5 intellect with Alice in play. The ability to dish out some extra damage when you discover a clue is also very nice. 1 damage may not seem like much, but it will likely save you or another investigator on the table in action if the enemy has an odd health total. It's also a good way to ping aloof enemies. If those aloof enemies also have the Hunter keyword, Alice may be able to take them down all by herself given enough time and locations. As for Well Maintained, it's a much more narrow card. If items don't figure prominently in your strategy, you don't really need to bother with this card. If you've got a souped up firearm or another prized item that you'd like to leverage during a scenario, Well Maintained will certainly help you protect it. If you play your cards right, it may even let you recycle that item once it runs out of charges so you can play it again fully loaded. That's a pretty good effect for a card that's free, fast, and costs 1 experience point. Good stuff for the Guardian investigators in this pack. That's going to do it for this review. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.